Welcome, all EMF warriors. I have a really cool guest today. His name is James Lech, and he is in South Africa, and he has some really amazing insights with the EMF issue. He has already pursued his master's degree in the pursuit of EMFs for many reasons, which we're going to go into in the podcast. But he's also pursuing his PhD right now. And he has a really, really amazing, impressive background that I'd like to share. So it turns out that James was actually the first South African to be officially diagnosed and recognized in South Africa with the electromagnetic field intolerance syndrome. That's what they call it there. So is that the correct classification? Did I get that right?
Thank you for welcoming me. Yeah, it is correct. What happened was, everyone hops on a bandwagon of EHS. And, when I was doing my research and looking into it, we had a term called echo chambering where, lobbyists and industry use the word EHS and, pilot on the associated words with it in Google search. Mm-hmm. And what I found in my research was, EHS came originally from the Swedes in the 80s. And, in original translation, it might have sort of worked, but it got lost in cross-translation. And, since then, it's always been I'd say an Achilles heel for anyone that has an EMF issue. So in about 2012, I came across a paper by Professor Belpoem. And there he, well articulated everything of, in order to actually medically describe or discuss this EMF issue, EHS is completely the wrong word to use for medical definition or description. Mm-hmm. And, he broke it down. He did all the science and the reasoning for it because, he's a doctor himself. And he proposed the term electromagnetic field intolerance syndrome because technically that is what it is. And in my research, I applied one of the methodologies was something called scientific technical analysis. And this is used in economics. We also use it in climate change. And it's broken into three categories. You have a sensitivity, you have adaptability, and you have vulnerability. And, all of us humans and life on Earth is technically already electrosensitive. I mean, we need the sun and we respond differently to the different spectrums of it. And what happens is we all have the second category of adaptability, where we have an adaptive mechanism and tolerance threshold to the certain EMF. So a person that's fair skin and red haired would maybe last 5 minutes in the midday sun, where me, I can be a couple of hours and I won't burn. But not everyone's the same, and that's why we don't use that Procrustean effect. What happens is, when everyone's already sensitive, and when the biology of the person is no longer able to have that adaptability or compensation mechanism, they reach that tipping threshold where they then go into a state of vulnerability. And the definition there is where, without the compensation, leads then to temporary or permanent damage. Mm-hmm. So linked to that, to use the word EHS doesn't work because a person's already sensitive. If a person goes in and they come home, they recover, they technically would be an EHS because they're sensitive. But when they're starting to have effects that's causing to debilitate them, even we understand with the whole glucose effect and diabetes and person getting obese, if it renders them to such a degree, that would also make them intolerant to the radiation with the blue light. But in my case, it was all these symptoms would cause me a functional impairment, thereby rendering me disabled. And that was, a technical association then for electromagnetic field intolerance syndrome. So, syndrome is used for multiple symptoms, multiple issues.
Yeah. That's a really great insight. I immediately think even before EHS, back in the 1950s and 60s, when the term microwave sickness or microwave illness was used in the military kind of side of things, people would be using radar or they would be, using their microwave systems over longer periods of time. And then, like what you're saying, they would come down with an actual illness, a sickness over more prolonged periods of time. Like for instance, for my case, I've had like eye injury and damage around both the higher and the lower frequencies can affect my retinal capillaries. So
Yes.
it's interesting how everybody has so many different background, like different potential like intersections with their own body and their tissues, because I see it from like also the biological side. The mitochondrial side of the mitochondria is kind of at the basis of epigenetics and your environmental exposures for things. So if the mitochondria in certain parts of your body are, well protected, higher redox potential, all these things are going on, then maybe a person doesn't experience any issue. But then like in me, I know my eyes may have had some issues, or I have maybe some maternal inherited genetics, or I have some damage that happened early on in my life that's made my mitochondria in my eyes way more debilitated with these kind of frequency interactions. So it makes me think about like how much of the public knows about these potential intersections to their health, and especially like where you live in South Africa, how much is the public aware of the condition down there, like what it's called, like this new terminology, which is a better, like, I love the intolerance word. I also like just straight radiation sickness, because it's like the non-native, right? It's the non-native part of the non-ionizing spectrum. We already know about radiation sickness way up the scale in the ionizing part, but if you just kind of go down the scale, you're getting into the non-ionizing, but it's still radiation. So it is still, in my mind, like a blanket term, like radiation sickness. It's people can have this over longer or shorter exposures and their own, how they've lived their lives. So I'm now really curious, like what's going on there in South Africa, and how much is the public aware of it? Because right in the USA, it's really not in the main media. Media doesn't talk about it. I see a lot of articles that I mine for EMF Warriors that come out of South Africa, and it seems like that country is way more getting the message about this issue compared to other countries around the world. Is that a good perception or not?
I don't think so. Let me give you the historical story of me, and because as I alluded, I've been in magistrates court, I've been in high court, and so I'll give you a bit of history with that. So when we understand with DeLuca's paper, where they were able to find the genetic markers or precursors of persons that have the chemical sensitivity and the EMF-IS in their genes. So we already know there's a subpopulation that has, an intolerance to radiation. And, most people see it as a negative thing of, this is the kind of thing of, these people are isolated, they're outliers, they should be shunned, and what's wrong with them kind of scenario. Meanwhile, it's just a natural defense mechanism. And when I was small, I already had a suspicion that I had an intolerance to certain sorts of radiation. So, younger first, it was you had CRT syndrome. So when you had a CRT screen, the monitors,
right.
I found that my eyes would get dry. I'd have a type of blurry vision, come up in a headache. And, I went to see an eye specialist doctor, and he said, no, it's, you've got a parasite entered into your eye, and it caused scarring the back of your retina. And, later on, then also, when cell phones came out, there was a Nokia 5110. And my mother, this was in high school, and I remember I was in science class. My mother gave it to me for the day so that I could call her, because she tends to be late from work. And during the class, the phone rang next to me. And as it rang, I sort of went into this sort of blackout thing, and my nose started bleeding.
Wow.
And the teacher was shouting at me, like going, do you realize that your phone is ringing and that your nose is bleeding, kind of thing. And then another example I always picked up was, I love mathematics. And it was one of my favorite subjects in high school. And in math class, whenever the teacher would turn on the fluorescent lights, I would go into this zombie type state. And she would do a whole class for 20 minutes, and I just wouldn't remember what's going on, or she asked me a question, I had no idea. But when the lights were off, I was on top form and moving for it. And, you know, when it was in 2011 that I was hospitalized in the hospital for a couple of weeks and months kind of thing, you know, being tested for every single other thing under the sun of what's going on with me, because my condition was drastically dropping. And they even sent me to the Specialist Eye Institute, and they checked my eyes because I worried I might have MS or something. And they said, no, your eyes are fine. There's no retinal scarring damage in that. And so what would happen was, when I would have this intolerance to radiation, one of my many symptoms is I would have a blurred vision, but it wouldn't be for my whole eyes. It would only be certain pockets of my eye, or when I see something ahead of me, certain sections would be blurred. But when it came to then me getting my disability and recognized by the state, we have something called the ICD-10 code managers for Southern Africa. Every country has it. And I contacted them. I said, listen, this is what I have. These are symptoms. This is the reports. I sent them Bell Poems paper and some other materials. And, you know, which ICD-10 codes would you put together to describe this? Because ICD-10 is, if there's not a single code, you use different codes to describe a disease or affliction or issues. And so they put together a special task team, and they came back with 3 codes. One of them was W99.9, which means exposure to other man-made environmental factors. The second was T66, bracket microwave syndrome, and the description is other unspecified effects of external causes, radiation sickness. And the third one was Z58.8, which describes problems related to the physical environment. So with these, then a doctor is actually able to, you know, categorize medically your issues, and then you'll put the supplementary SD or PDX codes for your symptoms. And so this was done in my evaluation, and I went through many doctors evaluating me through the whole process. So the Ministry of Social Development worked together with the Ministry of Health, and we have a program called SASA, which is like State Disability Grant. And they had me first evaluated by a doctor then, and you know, you look at the reports, look at the MRIs and all these things, and you know, you said, look, I can see that you function impaired, because I was in a wheelchair and rather collapsed and having difficulties with things. And, you know, it sort of made sense. But then I was in, because I had an incident where I was criminally charged, and I had to appear in magistrate's court. And what happened was, the incident was that I was in the, because I was called South Africa's dog whisperer back in the day, given the work I was doing in that. Yeah. And I was with an associate, and he had one of the dogs that he put off lead, and unfortunately the dog bit a young girl. And because of how it was big in the media, and that this created a lot of sensationalism and everything. And I don't know if you remember the story of back in the day of Oscar Pistorius. They called him the Blade Gunner. CNN and all that.
Actually, I'm not that familiar with it now. Yeah, go ahead.
So he was a famous thing, and what happened was that the prosecutor wanted to make an example of me as a case precedent thing. And it actually went to the point where my wife said, when she walked past his office, he had a very small office, like a broom closet, with all the cases he's dealing with. But half of his wall was dedicated purely to me. And what happened was, he didn't have much evidence on the case because they didn't want to look at the details and certain technicalities. And yes, it's unfortunate the girl was injured. I was, you know, very heartbroken with it. But she ended up making a full recovery and no permanent damages. But what happened was that in order for him to sort of win this case or go forward, I mean, he tried blackmailing me, asking for money, which I didn't have, and all these scenarios. And he was trying to go, okay, let's go for the psychiatric route. And he didn't, you know, despite me having all the medical stuff, you know, he would keep trying to play a different story. and he challenged the disability that I was given by the state from before, where he was saying that, no, this gentleman here, or this man, he's faking it. It's just him trying to get out of, prison or something. And, I challenged this, and he then found a loophole in the system which he wanted to apply, because he knew he couldn't go through the normal formal charging process for going to court and evidence, even though I requested it. So his workaround around this was to have me admitted to a psychiatric institute. And the loophole there is that they can keep me there indefinitely, basically, until I choose to sort of say, you know what, I made it up and I get let out, be this 1 year or 2 years later, or unless I get a presidential pardon.
Wow.
So one of these like sort of loophole things he was trying to implement. So I picked it up, and my wife and I, we went to High Court, and we went and got an emergency interdict. And I had to represent myself in front of 2 judges, High Court judges, because I took the 2 prosecutors and the magistrate judges to High Court for discrimination and other not following procedure. The High Court judges saw that I definitely presented a lot of evidence and things were sound, and said that they were in the wrong. They weren't allowed to do what they were doing. But they asked that, if the prosecutor is still, not so sure about what if I'm faking or not, would I voluntarily subject myself to re-medical examination? Mm-hmm. And the prosecutor, only strategy he chose was to send me for a psychiatric evaluation. Now, unfortunately, in South Africa, I assume it's in the States, for a psychiatric evaluation or protocol, you have to rule out any biological causes. So therefore, a person must be sent for MRI scans, blood tests, and all sorts of other causes. However, that's not done in this country, and I assume in your part of the world as well. So it's always done as a subjective testing where the psychiatrist will ask a whole bunch of questions and try to catch you out on something and observe your motions and movements and all these things.
So I want to just stop you for a second. You just mentioned that as part of their protocol, they wanted to expose you to more non-native EMFs as part of the diagnosis.
Yes, he wanted to put me in a psychiatric institute, and the psychiatrist he brought in was saying, no, we're going to lock him in a room. Mm-hmm. We're going to have high-powered electrical lines and lights and more radiation, all that stuff on him, and we're just going to observe him for 2 weeks. And if it collapses, he says, I've done some evaluation. I don't think anyone's died from this kind of thing. But the funny thing is, before he came into the courtroom to testify, we got him on CCTV footage and some witnesses that the first time he saw my file, anything about EHS or radiation, he was looking in my court file and reading just before he went in to be questioned. So it was this, again, many things in life is about politics and working at, and we understand that. Right. But that's why you have to work the system and work with it and part of it, because people do get afraid, or they require their livelihood from other members. So it's just that thing.
Here we have a situation though where the people, the attorneys, the judges, all these people probably will have no education set or knowledge about EMFs to even properly make a judgment, right? So that's why how did you get from that point to actually having this diagnosed as an actual intolerance? How did you get there?
Well, when I already had it diagnosed, when I was diagnosed by the state, this was in 2011, 2012, when it was done through the Ministry of Social Development and Ministry of Health. Mm-hmm. So that was done by that regiment organ of the state. So it was the Department of Justice, under the Department of Justice, you have the National Prosecutor Authority. So he's a different organ of state, and he was challenging my disability. Mm-hmm. So when I volunteered to undergo a medical examination again, and he only chose psychiatrist, the lady, she put me through 6 hours of testing. So it's quite long and grueling, mm-hmm. and document everything. And she, in a report, she said that one, I have no psychiatric condition whatsoever, which was great news. And the second one is that there's evidence of neurological degeneration.
Okay.
But she did warn me, saying, "Listen, this report I'm putting together for you, you have to be wary that when I do hand it to the prosecutor, he's going to try bury it and not wanting to come onto the court, because then it becomes public knowledge and he gets in a lot of trouble."
Right.
So when he received the report, 2 days later, the case was dropped. And I then had to file a legal application in order to get a copy of the report for my records, which I did, so as a backup for anything else.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, that was a process. And, I guess in a way, what was unfortunate when I was diagnosed in 2011, 2012, and to, 2016, or beginning of 2016, I was unemployed for all those years, because no one wants to, they say if you can't be in the office in those high radiation environments, we don't want to hire you. It's too difficult, or we're not sure, we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So then in early 2016, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship from the South African government, where I was contracted to model the potential effects EMF radiation has on the population from infrastructure sources. So that's power lines, cell phone towers, radio transmitters, and Wi-Fi. So that I did over the master thesis over 2 years, where I guess my end goal was to put together a document that can be used by another organ of state or a private individual and use it in court to demonstrate the health effects. Because when I looked at case studies of legal policies and legal case law, international and both domestic. And domestic, everyone was always too scared to argue the health effect. They weren't sure how to do it. So I structured my thesis in such a way where you have a part of the law called, no matter what the other laws say, be it high security or privacy, all these things, if you're able to demonstrate something called a public interest override, it's like a trump card that beats everything else. So I used those legislative metrics in my GIS, spatial modeling and health models and those kind of things to make sure that I got enough information evidence to demonstrate this public interest override. So, a member of the public or an attorney or anyone can use my thesis as a very powerful scientific objective card. Because when you're in the courts, it's called everything is very systematic and it's very subjective. It's not one happens to one, it happens to the other. And so what happens is you can always have a judge reaching a biased conclusion, depending on how well the attorney is arguing your point or advocate. So at least with the scientific model and framework I created, and creates more objectivity to the whole analysis for both parties, for the opposing party and the accusing party. And I had I did a workshop demonstration at the Department of Justice, and I had reviewed by them, and they confirmed that the research had demonstrated a public interest override, and that also it's a rigorous, scientific approach to the seriousness and effects of EMF radiation.
Yeah.
So it helps do that, but it's very multidisciplinary. It's using social cultural factors, all these amazing, interesting things. But it's complex, and that's what the argument is.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I'm a systems designer by trade, and I can tell you that absolutely, once you have data points all over the place, it just becomes a huge, complex challenge to organize it all in such a way to pull in the data to make the data more meaningful. And what's really interesting to me about your project, your master's that you did, is that it got me thinking about how all of this relates to epidemiology and how it could maybe even be used for like if where all the cell phone towers, the Wi-Fi, just the radar systems, everything's located in an area, and then you start looking at the populations in those areas to see if there is more specific disease expressions based on that data. That's really helpful. I'm really, really worried about this next point I'm about to talk about, where in the future, like in the near future, all the the EMF emitting sources are going to be brought into like the neighborhoods, to the streets, all in through the infrastructure, all through the towns and such. So that blanket that's just there all the time, kind of like the power grid, almost gives the illusion, the blanket for industry to not show any of the epidemiology that you could actually expose right now before that all rolls in.
No, correct. I mean, I did a few things differently in my research to sort of tackle those epidemiology issues that happen. And I did try more on the epigenetics and the cultural factors. So what I did was I'll take data layers from multiple sources. So for me, it wasn't an issue of combining the data to get a result. It's actually getting the data from the sources themselves, the original sources.
Okay.
And industry refused to give it, and their quote was, they would not give the data even for public interest override academic research because it would be against their strategic commercial interests.
Yeah, like isn't that's like damning to say that, right? Like
it is.
If they were concerned about public safety, if it was like if they were pro health, they would say, whoa, is the things I'm doing actually contributing to the problem out there? Sure, I'll join you. I'll help you so then we can make more safe technologies to not give exposure to the people in the doses we're giving them. So,
well, technically they're doing nothing wrong because they are acting out their fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they're in they're in the legal standards too. I mean, where the thermal standards set, at least here in the United States, they're way down below it, but regardless, this area down below here is showing biological effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is. I mean, but the thing is, when you just focus on one particular radiation, I mean, in my research, I focus also a lot. I argue that, the magnetic fields are actually more of a concern than the radiation, but because of this negative bias issue, most people just think, okay, the cell phone towers, that's the issue. We want to know the data. And I'd argue, I mean, with I think called I created a Hygeia model. And what Hygeia does is that you take data from different sets and you put one on top of the other and the other. So even if one source isn't that maybe high on the levels, what a hazard condition is when you have multiple elements together that creates one. So if we're looking at a power line, you might be worried, okay, James, I am 1.5 kilometers away from a high voltage power line. And, that's definitely, and there's nowhere near, the 2 mellogauss issue. But what we'll find then is that, we have to take into account also the air pollution factor. So, within that 2 kilometer barrier on either side, buffer zone, you have a much higher level of ionization of the air with dirt particles. So what we look at other epidemiology studies is that if you have a chemical treatment plant of sorts that's within that buffer zone, and then you'll find members or persons within that section of the chemical plant and the power line have actually a higher level of asthma developing or respiratory issues than persons further away. So the radiation is a compounding effect on it, but it's not the direct cause of those additional health issues.
Yeah, like I like to say it, TMF Warriors, like a synergistic effect where you have like multiple things happening. We talk about this all the time, like mold exposures or toxins in the air, like you just said, or like even the frequency potentials where you're in a magnetic or electric field at the same time as having these higher frequencies at the same moment hitting your body, like the oxidative stress, right? What free radicals, the opening of the calcium channels, the calcium efflux, like the mechanisms are starting to become clear where you are synergistically hit with these things. And if you happen to be living your life, working here and then going home here, and you're just always in this toxic soup, environmental soup, compared to the next person that lives next door to you that might have like 3 or 10 times less synergistic exposures, then it like can really go under the radar, and it's almost like it's invisible to like people that they're actually having higher exposures compared to the person next door even.
Yeah, but I mean, it's our responsibility to develop or find mitigation options. And, one aspect I found very interesting in the research was the social cultural factors. So when we look at the protection enforcement or sensitivity or the risk threshold tolerance, so we're looking at a community that's Catholic versus Protestant, completely different on their view or risk of radiation exposure. And even I was looking at the permit application. So Catholic type of related, well, it's not, when we say Catholic or in the view, it's persons that explain the universe and God in more than one way. So Catholicism has, saints, so it would also be like Hindus and Buddhists and those kind of communities. They all rejected cell phone tower permits. But Protestants ones that sort of say, the word of God is in the book and that is the word, they accepted it. It's more market-driven effect. So you have taken a cultural factor is very important in this. So when I say about mitigation options, we learn about the things of, all right, blue light is one of the biggest issues here. And if you control that and you understand, with your diets and sort of getting grounding and, the right energy and that you're charging stuff up more the light, your adaptive mechanism is going to be increased. And as a culture, by you choosing to stand up or fight or educate, or that whole, citizen scientist kind of paradigm, you're able to create a cultural change that's then going to change this exposure and adaptability. I mean, back in the day, I remember when phones first came out, dinner time, sitting at the table, phones are off or they're away or the TV's off. Nowadays, most people are texting and by the dinner table. And that's a cultural choice. If you change that cultural facet, then that forces everything else on. In South Africa, when it comes, and I give talks, so I have parents contacting me and saying, James, my child's really suffering and I want to, how do I tackle it on the school because they're putting Wi-Fi in or the cell phone tower? And the parents, voting majority, they want to have their tablets and be this new age thing because it's, smart tech is going to make the kids smarter. And, I say, within the law, there's this thing called the Promotion of Equality and Unfair Discrimination Act, where, it doesn't matter if the majority of the parents say, we want to have the iPads or tablets. It's if one child is having an effect from the radiation, and a parent then approaches the equality court. And the nice thing, equality court, it can be a very quick process of a few months. It's not like regular court that takes years. And, you have to look at the argument at if you're going to accommodate this child, one, is there reasonable accommodation? So is it very expensive or not? To land cable a classroom full of iPads is about $500. So it's very cost effective. And secondly, you're going to have faster speeds and more secure, that whole argument. So that works in that aspect. The second thing of fair versus unfair discrimination, we look at in our South African history of people in the past were, because of apartheid, were segregated and not given access to certain freedoms or access to certain advancements. So, if we're looking at an environment where, say, it's a rural area and it takes too long or it's too difficult to get a fiber optic cable out to them, then, fair discrimination would be to install, line of sight transmitter and have a wireless cellular or Wi-Fi system in that area. But within a reasonable time, you can argue, okay, it's there, but the fiber must be installed. But if you're in an environment where you already have fiber optic installation, high-speed internet, then there isn't this argument of everything must be wireless. So a parent would win on that application that my child's health and their longevity to grow and learn better trumps the majority. And that action of a parent creates and forces this cultural change. So, but in the media, it gets squashed a lot because, I remember when I went to go meet Professor Michael Kundi, and I was pursuing for him to be our supervisor, my PhD, and for I'd say about 90% of our time was him talking and him just grilling me the whole time of, are you sure you want to do this type of research? Because it is career suicide. There's lots of colleagues. He has a student that even tried to publish a paper. It took him almost 5 years just because of this rebound and difficulty. And that's the difficulty I'm having now, trying to find a supervisor for my PhD. Because domestically, I've done the rounds. My vice chancellor even looked. There isn't really the local expertise to supervise my research, particularly since it's multidisciplinary. So the only other option is to go overseas. But now there's the issue of funding. So our previous president we just had that had a vote of no confidence. He changed the education bill where I was meant to get funding, and then he said, okay, funds that were meant to go for postgrads now going to undergraduates. So there's more free education. So I was meant to get funding for that from the Research Foundation. They said, sorry, the last minute, we can't fund you anymore due to budget constraints. So now I'm like struggling around looking all over the country for a supervisor that's willing to accommodate my PhD. And it's even harder now that I'm wanting to switch gear into the quantum biology. And I have a biochemistry head of department that's going, listen, it's great. I like what you're doing, but I'm not sure I have expertise of how to do certain testings for you. And then I contact the physics HOD and he says, he's got radiation dosimetry in his background and luminance and that. And says, look, I've only got this part of physics, but I don't actually know the biochemistry or medicine stuff. I think you need to go to the medical school or biochemistry department. And medical schools aren't interested because they want HIV or they say, okay, we're having issues of we're retiring, so we can't have anyone supervise you. So it's a process. It will take time. But in the meantime, I'm just, I'm kicking gear into this quantum biology aspect, and it makes such a difference to understand and learn about the physics or explain the biology. And then it's just the argument of, is there a health effect, is just more easier to trump. It's not this issue anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me too. Like the number one factors for my electrosensitivities or my electro intolerances more like have been to really get my circadian rhythm like in gear and down every day, like wake up with the sun and omit all lighting as much as possible when the sun goes down, like in the home or where you're at. It's really hard to do just with modern life and people working, but the melatonin benefit, as a free radical scavenger, getting outside if you're out and up with the sun, you're getting more sun onto your surfaces. So that's also a beautiful thing, right? For making vitamin D and for setting up the sleep patterns and setting up the melatonin and just using nature. And that's kind of my beef that I've had with the entire modern world, right? Like it's turning out to me to be like, 300 years ago or even 200 years ago, there was no power grid. There were no wireless. There were none of these frequencies. There was very little pollution. There was still some pollution, right? Industrial revolution.
Yes.
But we generally as a society, we weren't in environments where exposures came into our homes from the outside or things were entering our areas and we didn't need to make a choice. And even today and all of around the world, we really don't have a choice to say, I don't want these non-native frequencies to come in. So it's going to be a point when the whole world wakes up and they're realizing, wait a minute, there's actually a choice to be made to not get this other form of toxin that's affecting my biophysics that actually works synergistically to maybe promote a disease. Like it's really this weird kind of fuzzy thing. And because it's invisible, I think everyone just banks on this will never go public because no one's going to believe the person that they're having these exposures if they happen to live in a high EMF area unless they can show it, right? So like my meters, I literally have I call it the nutcase of meters because it's got I think I'm up to 26 or 27 different kinds of EMF meters in it.
Don't try to donate me some because I could not get funding for my master. And they say, you must go do measurements. I say, give me money. No, we don't have money.
Yeah. So I've loaned my meters out to people locally and they've returned them. And I've even gone on little, what I call my Spock walks or Spock walking, where I'll go out and I'm thinking of doing this and just going around and having the meters sound mode on so people can actually hear the frequencies around them when you're just walking through the streets in a public environment. And if they come up to me and ask me questions about it, I can let them know what's going on in their environments around them that's invisible right under their noses.
I've got a question for you. I mean, this is, I had quite a revelation lately, and I correct me if I'm wrong, if I sort of see maybe in the same boat that you might be a bit stuck and having trouble moving forward. So it will take me a few minutes to explain, but let's
Go ahead.
bear with me.
Yeah.
All right. So like I'm taking the assumption like with you, when I was doing my mastering before that, like I said, my study, I wanted to know where everything was because I knew I was getting affected, and I'd sort of, if I remove myself from the exposure, then I'm safe and I have more time to have homeostasis and get better.
Mm-hmm.
And plotting all the data and everything. And, I was producing something for the court to protect stuff, and we need to create special, safeties here. However, the reality is that, the radiation is more ubiquitous now and more people are purchasing it. And, I was getting on that format, and then I was telling the story. I listened to one of your podcasts about the whole smart meters. I was mentioning how the guys, they said they did a liability form that they would summons on people that the utilities didn't, retaliate. They just got aggressive emails and that. Mm-hmm. Where in my case, we moved to a new residential area. And what happened was, before we moved in, I got from the CEO of the smart meter company utility, because the developer told me to contact them, that he would make sure that it would be a LAN-based or hardwire smart meter. So it wouldn't be the wireless RF meter. Mm-hmm. And they set up, it's really bad. They have the thing of, they have two antennas. It's within a confined environment, a lot of concrete in that, and you have a lot of localized hotspots erupting. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, we moved in, they still went and installed the usual system, and they threatened, we're doing this regardless part of aspect. And what happened was, they installed it, and the next morning I go to the toilet, and my guts are bleeding. Blood's coming out.
Horrible.
And so but now when they confronted me, and they're verbally assaulting me and saying all these things, despite I have a high court order saying that I have the disability in that, and I already recorded everything. So again, I went with my wife, went to the high court to get an emergency interdict application. They didn't even pitch up, but a week later they disabled the system and changed things. But because they were upset about the retaliation, because more things came up where I was meant to be at the AGM and share to the public forum about all the information of what's been going on and loss of funds and so forth. They then went and called the police and laid false criminal charges against me, so that don't appear. But what happened was, when the cops came, they were told a story that I was running around the state like a crazy person, ripping out wires and cables and that. Even though, given my knowledge and learning, that all I knew to do was just disconnect the antenna cable and the RF frequency disappeared. Mm-hmm. So police came. They refused to look at any of my disability documents. They said, "Look, we are taking to the station." And there I had reached a state of hypertension. So my blood pressure was 162/106, and they called the medics because they said that I had a stroke. And even the one medic said that, no, I've heard about microwave syndrome. I can, and he was explaining all the stuff to the other guys. The other medic also came and said, no, I suffer from the radiation stuff as well, and this is happening. And what happened was, I was to the point where I was just collapsing, where my left side wasn't functioning. I was trying to talk or write, and it would be like another language kind of scenario.
Yeah, that's a stroke right there.
But what happened was that I reached this thing where, this protection thing, or I can't be protected anymore. And I have to go for actually focusing on what can I do to, like at the quantum level, regenerate myself, or the mitochondria level. Mm-hmm. And I went to, one thing I started doing was, okay, I'm going to look at the Wim Hof method, which is hyperoxia and hypoxia breathing, and then combine the cold thermogenesis. And, with stuff with Jack Cruz, we understand that very well, how it affects with the infrared and the swelling, and, certain things were working and weren't working. Mm-hmm. But what I found was, the more I got into it, observing your physical characteristics, you have quite a lot of inflammatory fat. And probably you find that even though you controlling your diet to a certain degree, you're still having this amount. Right. And when I started applying, like I always struggled with my face the most. And when I started having then, like we have the seaweed here, and I just harvested the seaweed and ate some of that. And then afterwards I started having the fish oil and that, because I haven't got access to the fish yet, or oysters. But just on those 2 days of having the kelp and the iodine, straight away the inflammation in my face dropped, something I'd always struggled to do. And cheekbones coming out, and it's more out there. And sort of what I realized is that, one, like, what you guys do at the EMF Warriors is that, yes, you're doing the activism awareness thing of what people should be doing. They need to take action. And I found in South Africa, people just want to complain and say, please, someone save me. I'm going. It's not going to work unless you as a community do fringe politics and actually go and toy in the streets, or take these guys to court, because nothing's going to change. But the second part is, you need to demonstrate that you're doing what it is to get your health back in order and show those changes. So I found, like, you have the meters, that's one thing, but it always becomes subjective. But if you have the lab test done, and we know with EMF, it's, a multiple complexities then show up a whole story. So, when you have the functional MRI done, when you have the different blood works done, and the EEGs, EKGs, and all the things, that helps support your story, and that ends up being a strong argument to it. But if I found if your body is always struggling to sort of beat the system, and you don't have any discipline on it, then you are going to fall back into that paranoia thing of, I need to get away from it. It's just too much in my space. But if you follow these routes of, sort of doing the labs and the testing, then if they decide, okay, now outside your house, they're going to put a 5G transmitter, and you're going, what do I do? You at least have the blood work and the doctor going, I'm going to court, judge or magistrate, emergency, review it. This is the proof I have. I am more intolerant to it, and this is what this radiation can do to me.
See, you're thinking exactly from a systems designer's point of view. That's perfect. Like, the more data you can collect, show the mounting evidence, even like your blood cell status, right? Like, just everything in combination. But you just hit on a great point, is like, you need to be a biohacker or like a mitohacker to really like know how your body reacts to everything. I'm just for your own health, because if I wouldn't have gone the route of like using nature and trying all these different biohacks, I'm actually doing a DDW biohack right now. Even like I experiment on myself, and that's like the citizen science. And if you don't,
what's DDW?
That's a deuterium depleted water.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yes.
Just to get and I took the measurement. I know what my initial is like, 142.8 parts per million. And after a period of time, I'm going to take it again and see what it goes down to, and see if I have any beneficial health effects from it. So it's a lot of things are easy to measure, get data points on. A lot of people just don't have the money or the time to do it. Right. That's mainly the biggest hurdle. But if they're really concerned about their health and they really want to get that information, you got to try different. Like I feel like I have to try different things, right?
Yes.
And by doing different hacks over the years, it's been really illuminating, because I know what works, what doesn't work, what data I've gotten in, what other data I don't get in. All my exposures I have a lot of EMF exposures all over the place, but I know specifically, if I walk by a certain wall in my house, because of the electric field generated when those circuit breakers are on, I'll run the risk of some problems. So I just stay away from the wall, but deal with it unless I get somebody in and rip out the wiring and, a couple $1,000s later, have it all resolved.
But is it your home that you bought, or you're renting?
It's a home that I've recently moved into, that I bought, that, after I've lived here long enough, I just know all the hot spots in the house. And generally most of them are fine, except for a few. Yeah.
But you look like a DIY guy. Couldn't you redo some of the wiring yourself and just have an electrician certified afterwards? I mean, just to have the cross wire effect,
Yeah, no, I mean, I could, but I don't, because I want to get it all approved through, like, I do everything done professionally. So I'll get the actual real electricians in, and I'll get, but it's also like, then you have house members that may or may not want to use that money on other things. So here we have the modern life.
The commune. Okay, I get it. Yeah.
So, and it's like, it's kind of like, who digs into the pot and where does the money get spent? And, it's the normal way of things. So if in a perfect world, the house would have already been built where the wiring would have been well shielded. There's less chance that over time something could go wrong. But just in nature, things happen. Like if you have an electrical system out in my yard with wires coming in, you could have the tree roots grow down over time, affecting the system, at some point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and the city does its best to try to keep up on like all these things, but they don't know it's a problem. More people like us that have meters and go around and measure things actually find the problems. And I've reported multiple problems to the power company, and they're very responsive to it. And they like me doing it. So like I see there's could be this marriage in the future where there's a lot of people out there that know about the issues that help even the people that provide the power and all these other systems. So, but
So tell me how you
all make it
measure
safe.
the.
Yeah.
So tell me how you measure the stray voltage in the earth when the trees go down.
So like exactly, stray voltage is a big one, and cities actively go around, right, trying to look for stray voltage. They have cars and trucks that they drive around that can detect where there's stray voltage to make it so it's not a public safety issue in general.
Yeah.
So I just think that needs to be extended, right? It's almost like we have fire departments for putting out fires, but we don't have the EMF department for mitigating the EMF craziness that might be out there.
I felt also, I always had a strategy of to invest in stuff that you can sort of have for life. So it has a very high upfront cost, but it's going to have that longer solution.
Yes.
Years ago, I got a BEMO pack. So it's that pulse electromagnetic therapy. Mm-hmm. And, when I'd have the swelling or the issues, it worked exceptionally well with the radiation, but then it would quickly have an issue and dissipate. And then, I decided, okay, I'm going to invest in infrared sauna. But I didn't get the normal cheap ones. I got the low EMF one, which costs 5 times more.
Yes.
The nice thing is the system has a lifetime warranty on it. So it's an investment for not me, but my whole family. Mm-hmm. And we're able to use it. And it worked very well. Didn't work well initially because, I was learning the process, and I found if I just went in and didn't have a CT session afterwards, I'd have a high inflammatory reaction.
I see.
But as I learned more of the breathing, the hyperoxia inside the sauna, and then do the CT afterwards, no swelling, high energy, and it worked exceptionally well. So it's about this mixture of things. Mm-hmm. And, even I did the thing, I still have, is I bought an Aronia net for the bed to block, technically it's not blocking the radiation, but the focus was I have it on the windows and I have it around the bed. It's not, you can never block the radiation, but what you want to do is reduce the peaks. And then it's not easier to build that adaptive mechanism. One thing in the future I'd like to, what I'm setting up for is a magnetico, because understanding the science of it, because it's creating a magnetic field, and it's the more powerful and creates more a circular effect. My hypothesis is that not only are you creating a stronger DC field for yourself and better regulation, but by having that field around you, it's going to have a more of a sort of repelling effect from other external EMFs to help in that regard. But again, you've seen the price of what it is for you there, mm-hmm. Where for it to be shipped out the US on their site to South Africa is more than double what the unit actually costs.
Yeah, it's got to be. Those are super, super heavy, so they'll have it probably be shipped on a ship, right?
Well, it's also the import duties and the VAT that they charge on it as well. I mean, we have 15% VAT, and then import duties might be another 20%. So it does make quite an issue. But these things, once you invest in them locally, think of it it's a cultural effect. You're not doing it for yourself; you're doing it for your family or your community. And that, that's why I did a lot of my research. The Ministry of Environment asked me to help put a proposal together for food security of how radiation affects bees and, fauna and flora kind of thing. Because in my Hygieia model, I looked at what are mitigation options that are cost effective for community. So, if you're going to put an infrared sauna, you put it for a residential estate, you buy, a 12-person one. That works out being a very cost-effective solution with a CT pool next to it. That's something that becomes a cultural practice then. Another thing is, I was talking to a professor in Japan. I don't know if you're familiar with a hyperbaric chamber.
Yeah, I am.
All right. So
Or
hyperbaric.
desensing, yes, your senses. Yeah.
No, that's different. So a
Oh, yeah,
hyperbaric,
different.
yeah, a hyperbaric chamber. They use it when originally you have the divers. They come up with the bends and they put them in a
Yes,
high
that type.
pressurized
Mm-hmm. Okay.
tube with a high level of oxygen.
Right. Right.
The issue with hyperbaric chambers, again with hyper, is that the high amount of oxygen it actually can cause oxidative stress and issues. So only for certain medical procedures would it be utilized.
Mm-hmm.
And they even use it for radiation burns and poisonings and that. And then I came across a professor in Japan, and this is doing very well in Japan, where he formulated using math, and they call big machine, and it's called a hypobaric chamber. So the keyword's hyper, so hypo. And what it does changes altitude all the time while keeping the same oxygen level. So it's instead of having to do the Wim Hof method, that breathing by itself, which is hard to do it for a certain time because we get lazy, you just sit in this chamber, it does it automatically for you. And what he found was, all the patients see in medical case files is that the way it's changed in mitochondria, I mean, cancers, 82 different types of cancer just disappear within a few days. Inflammatory diseases, autoimmune disease, all these things, just disappear. So again, a technology like that you put, because you can have 20, 30 people sitting at the same time for 45-minute sessions at a time, and they can go multiple sessions. So again, it might cost, say, $10 million for the machine, but you put it in a community area, it's a much more effective mitigation option. Mm-hmm. So, the alternative way, you can try fight industry of going, down the cell towers or down the power lines, where's it going? Or you can come, have your community, your church, or your residential estate invest in these type of mitigation solutions together for the community. And that changes the health effects, and they can see more things, different parts. I mean, even the whole lighting with the non-native EMF blue light, some areas are the policies where you will have the yellow amber light for the street lights and the neighboring areas. Other guys, I'm just putting the white light because I think it looks cool, because I can see things brighter. So doing those changes then changes everything else in the policy. Even like the whole thing with, I saw you guys had Iris. I've been using Flux actually more, and as I learned more, I found the default settings of Flux to be actually very bad and didn't actually make an effect. So I customized it to have more of that incandescent effect, to go that more reddish yellow at night.
Right.
And I have it on the TV as well. And what used to happen when I had previous effects, or even more bluer light, I would be up until midnight, 1 a.m, struggling. And now with it having going to that reddish effect, and I'll lie in the bed with my wife and say, okay, let's watch a quick show, and easily within 15 minutes I'm out like a rock, just from that change, that light effect. And yeah, it's a cultural practice change, and that's, I found, is going to give you a lot more solutions in changing the greater scheme of things.
Yeah, EMF Warriors, we do a lot of that. We talk about circadian rhythm. We talk about just all the ways that you could potentially help mitigate the oxidative stress, or just getting your health better overall. But the trick is really, like, at the core is behavioral changes, like you're saying. Like, is a person willing to potentially even change their work because they're working the night shift, graveyard shift? Or is a person willing to not have the behavior of checking their phone more than 100 times a day, because they're, especially in the evening, as circadian biology is letting us know that we're kind of destroying our health. We are destroying our health by the light frequency angle. And we have a lot of the world population really focused on the biochemistry, right? The foodstuffs that we ingest, the supplements we ingest, and all that to compensate for it. But they're not getting the light side of it at all.
Well, for the light side, I mean, technically, and this is a strong word, but you can sue for it to be implemented. So at your work environment, I mean, you have enough supportive data and the studies now, and the opinions that, at your work office environment, one, you can say, look, the administrator must have Iris or Flux or whichever, or Twilight installed on the machines, and it must be at this setting by default. And if they don't do it, you take them to your labor law, or your union not to implement it, because that's their mandate. When it comes to personal device, it's the same thing. You have it as a default setting. And those things create the turnaround of stuff. And you have more people that get onto going, oh, why must this be done? And when you say about the night shift workers, the night shift is doable. It's possible, just as long as you don't have the blue light. So you just have the different lighting installed. And again, that's, I have hospital, when I gave a talk recently at a Congress, and all these hospital personnel coming to me and saying, listen, I'm having all these issues. Can you, talk to my supervisors to have things changed? So again, it's, if you're part of a labor union or work, you can force this action to be taken because there is enough now, more supportive data and arguments for it than it was 5 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, the lighting side of it, in my mind, is a big chunk of it, but also the wireless frequencies in the air and the magnetic and electric fields in studies in the science has been shown that it can also reduce melatonin. So,
yes, correct.
So it
kills the DHA. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just like, that's where I'm more concerned is about like where we are currently in the world with our proliferation, and then where we look to be, and when the majority of the public is okay with saying we're going to throw these frequencies everywhere through the air, and it's what it's doing is it's taking away choice, where the rest of the public that don't want to necessarily have it, like let's say they want to have it sometimes of the day, they don't want to have it other times of the day. Currently, there's just no choice, right? Like nobody has choice in the matter, and that's what.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the light one is a much easier thing to work on it because you're not taking away people's social currency. Wireless access and devices, it's their social currency, and if they don't have. I had one of my previous professors. He told me how he came with this brick to a classroom of teaching kids, and the whole classroom just laughed at him, saying, "Why does he have this old brick? Why don't they have the latest smartphone kind of thing?" Mm-hmm. So if you tackle the white light thing, people get to evolve a lot quicker. During my thesis, I got ridiculed a lot by my superiors. Even the professor I was talking about. He was a warden for the residents, and he's a very tall guy, and he said no, there's no such thing with the radiation, and he had a Wi-Fi router for the whole building, which was half a meter away from his bedroom head.
Oh, wow.
In that same room. And then after he read my research, and he kept saying, "No, this can't be done." I have this strategy where the more red marks I get on a document, the better. I just kept addressing. They say, "You can't do this." I said, "Nope, but I've got evidence of this. I got this and that." And halfway through it, he said, "You know what? The stuff that you're saying actually is real." And he moved the stuff out. He said he started switching off Wi-Fi, started doing all these effects, and became much more consciously aware of stuff.
Yes.
And it's only because sort of I gave more that if he didn't listen to me and follow me, he was going to get in trouble with his job anyway, because he has to supervise and do things accordingly. The light, my understanding is if you tackle the light aspect first on that practice, then it's easier to get onto that light argument and, us being photosensitive, and then you can start working on the wireless and magnetic fields after the fact. When you had interview Jack, he always goes about the light, water, magnetism, and, he's always in this light thing, and everyone's about, well, what about the water magnetism? Or it's just too airy-fairy. And, he found himself with a strategy of if he originally was doing water and magnetism, people just shunned him. But when you start to learn the stuff, it changes very differently.
It requires that timeline to like get all the information straight from all the different researchers and sources, and on the surface, it can absolutely look like, oh, this stuff is like kind of like you're saying, airy fairy. What is this all about? Even EMFs, right? I mean, a lot of times I talk with people about EMFs, and unless they're actually like in a field that use them, like they're a physicist or an electrical engineer or this kind of stuff, then they don't they know what it is,
yes.
But they don't realize necessarily the health implications. So.
Well, they're not taught, and also from a physics point of view, with the IGNIP model, they are taught to use mathematical equations that don't allow to use the biological equation. That's why Russia and China have given ICNIP the finger every time they want to create a consolidated. No, it is. They read the transcripts and that. They stand up and they give them, the verbal finger of saying, your system is terrible. It doesn't account for these biological things, and we're not happy with your equations. So use different equations and we can work together. Right. So that's, in our research to do that. But again, like the cultural thing, you're asking me, and I was talking earlier before about how I have this EMF service dog now. And, originally, I used to sort of train service dogs, and I had a service dog years ago. It was also again sort of EMF, then I called it EHS. But I didn't know as much as I did now, and I made mistakes, and I got to learn. And after I had my stroke earlier this year, and my wife's sort of seeing how we're looking long-term solutions here, and I can't rely on her or my kids because Lily and River are 2.5 and 1.5. I can't rely on them to sort of help me and treat me like another kid and help me out. So she was very insistent of we're going to get a puppy, train him to be a service dog again, and it's going to be specifically for your EMF intolerance and condition. And I was very reluctant because I didn't have the best after effects last time, and again this whole fear thing of explaining EMF, people look at you funny and it's very difficult, and it's a real challenge. But she was insisting on it's going to happen, you're going to do this, and sort of okay, I trust her and I'll go through the process. She's a very convincing wife, very great supportive wife, but she is able to help a lot. So I then started researching, trying to understand, okay, what are service dogs again used for? So re-educate myself. And when I look at it, many persons get service dogs for these mitochondria-related diseases, where they're having the neurological and functional impairment, just like I do. So I'm thinking, I research, okay, what can I do? Okay, the idea is when I get impaired or I'm in the process of, of having problems with my function or losing facilities on myself, or I'm having trouble with vision or walking, or I have a days confused thing, the dog is then trained to help in those circumstances. But it's also trained to help you with a certain lifestyle. So because a dog has to go outside to do its business, right, you're forced to go out into the yard at sunrise and have that grounding effect and do these things at the same time. And you're forced to go to the beach and the ocean. You're forced to do these mechanisms and learning. But what is very key is, originally I just wanted to have the base that said service dog. And I do in the past, I did this defense thing of saying, it's my disability stuff. You're not allowed to ask me my health kind of personal information, as it is in the US ADA Act. No, I've said, no, that's nonsense. You can't do that. You will put on the vest that is an EMF service. She made it need to make it comical, service puppy in training. I'll explain why she asked that, because my brain wiring, since I was small, my brain is wired differently. I'm not able to pick up nuances. So people sometimes feel you come across as abrupt or rude, but I'm not able to just pick up normal conversation. So as a result, my brain sees things very differently. I need metrics. So she guided me, you will do this kind of EMF notification. And what I found was at first I was resistant, I was having trouble, but as I got to sort of understand it more, reevaluate myself, it became a very helpful healing tool for me, because when I go out and engage people, they ask, wow, EMF, what is that? And I'll say, well, it's to help with the EMF radiation that says the dog detected. Well, not really, it detects my effect to it and it's meant to help me through the process. And then they'll go, oh, this person has this kind of problem, that person, this other guy approached me, what, you're right, my wife is suffering and she works in an IT company. I bought a girls meeting and I had her at 200 girls exposure. Wow. And I said, well, contact me because this is what I did in my past and so I'm doing now, and, help you with the labor law and CCMA and these things to try to help her out. So it's a helpful public awareness tool in that regard. And, as a result, I'm not feeling as ashamed or having as much restriction with the things. So yes, I'm wearing my blue light blocking glasses when I'm walking around daytime in certain areas. But, at front face value, I wouldn't want to have a service dog, because for the reason of you have to train, you have to look after. It's a commitment process. The dog then dies eventually. You build a strong bond, and also whenever you want to go to a building or area, here particularly in South Africa, you get harassed and abused by security guards or shop managers saying you can't come in here with a dog. You're not a blind person. And you have to say, no, look, I've got this court document or license from the magistrate saying that you have to let me in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to always carry this paper and, all these issues. So it can be a schlep in a way. But on the other side, it's a real blessing because, I have this additional tool or mechanism to help me, get better and have more functionality and, all these aspects. So I'll never be 100%. But I have a better quality of life. And that is the goal of a service dog, to help a person with those aspects. So, listeners out there, I wouldn't recommend, it's cool, get a dog, you can have it. But, if you are in certain circumstances, and, the tertiary benefit is that it does create more awareness because,
yes.
With my court stuff and everything, this is high media stuff, everything was just buried. They didn't want to have it a big thing. Even the High Court judge didn't want it really to get out there with the relation of things. So, this way it creates more of that community interaction and people more accommodating, say, okay, how can I help you? What can we do? And they don't have an issue when you walk into a room and you want to turn off the fluorescent lights. Without the dog, it's kind of like, who are you to change my environment here?
Right.
But with having service dog displaying it creates more of this reason and there's this linkages for them. Why must I do it? Or let me, these are the issues I also have myself. How can I change my environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the awareness part of it is just so underestimated because I'm always looking for conversation starters when I see people, let's say, having a phone on their brain. A lot of time, most of the time, I actually just won't even say anything and let them.
Oh, the worst is for me when you have a pregnant mother that has the cell phone on her tummy the whole time or gives it to the kid as an entertainment tool.
No, I've seen that firsthand too, where I'm standing in line and the kid is, you can tell, addicted to the phone. And then the mother is actually playing on it and the kid's reaching up, I want my phone. And then starts a huge public scene because he's not getting his modern day candy. And then eventually the moment she hands it to the kid's silent and then engaged, right? So that shows us the modern times, but I'm always looking for that thing that can help start a conversation about it. And that's why I'm starting to literally bringing my meter around, turning the sound on. People are curious, what's going on with that weird sounding frequency thing? Is that, it's not a radio, definitely. It's something else I'm hearing this. And then a couple times people have come up with their phones and then I say, oh, just put your phone close to it, see what happens. And then they're shocked, right? So it's those kind of little things. I've even in the past, well, I won't say it, but I've literally gifted things to people and say, hey, do you want this? And they're like, oh, sure, why not? And then they get it. And then they get a one-liner in there about what's going on, just to maybe be a stepping stone for them to learn about the issue.
And meters are very helpful. I mean, especially a person's in a panic state and they get this type of PTSD effect from the exposures.
Right.
And they just see something, even if it's off, and they have this biological trigger with it. That's what has been a historical issue. I mean, with DeLuca, we understand, okay, a certain subpopulation has a genetic predisposition. And then you also have people who have, the fungal virus or virus that affects the central nervous system, they're more affected. But what happens is with that subpopulation that's more having intolerance, of that subpopulation, there's another subpopulation which you have a difference between sensitivity and sensing activity.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And those are the ones that are called the weird witches or harlequins or those kind of things. And it's much. That's where you have that whole double-blind study or issues with that. But and you asked me beforehand, do I do the thing of using a meter or do I just sense and feel? With me, I'm one of that population where I have a sensing to it. And over time, I actually would desensitize myself because you just feel too much, or even direction where it's coming from, and it's an issue. But yeah, a meter is very helpful because you are going to make mistakes. You are going to have this let down thing, or just feel down with it. And having a meter to sort of can help wake you up. But having these traumas or these health effects does help you out. I mean, like I said, I had a stroke early in the year, and that created a wake up call for me. Before that, our previous family dog, he died because of bone cancer. And the reason, from my understanding, why I got it was the previous place we stayed in, we had the external power cable, a major cable coming along the floor there, and he would always insist to go lie on it. And the exact same spot he was lying on that cable, the high field, is where the bone cancer developed. But everything else in his diet was amazing. It was organic, had all the nutrition, he was getting exercise, sun, all those things, but at high exposure. And with that, I had a lot of guilt that came with it. I was aware of it before, but I wasn't reacting to it. And then we moved to a new place, that old place we had our daughter, Lily. And, I was more aware, no, I'm not having Lily be affected, because from the genetic pass on, she developed a more sensitivity like I did, but River didn't have it when he was born. And so then with her, I'd say, okay, we can't put the bed here, we can't put it there because it's too close to the power outlet. So then I would disconnect the cable, move the bed, and it was, fine. And then we moved to this new place, and the residential state, the grounding cable that they have set up is so corrupted. The grounding not meant to have much of a field intensity coming out, but yet it spikes to the roof. Half a meter away, you've got these high readings coming off. Yeah. So literally in the kids' room, because it's set up, I went to it wouldn't work the junction box. I went to the main plug section, and then in their room, there's no power going at all. And then for our bedroom, some of the plugs, I did that as well. So again, each environment is going to be different. Having a meter helps you diagnose and see where these issues are coming in, and then you can react to what solution you're going to implement and find alternatives to it and change it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we've gone pretty long here. We could probably go another couple hours if we have the time, but I just wanted to ask you, is there anything else that you'd want to share about your situation, what you're doing, especially with your PhD coming up here?
Well, with my PhD, if I can find a supervisor, that'll be great. Originally, my PhD, I wanted to focus on another iteration on my geo model and do actual measurements on power lines, and do a different effect with it. We take multiple sources together and see the correlation. But after my stroke, that changed when I went to quantum biology. And I'm focusing more, let me do, because EMF is non-linear in the effect, I don't do well with doing a single focus study of specialization where there must be only one element. So I want to do a thing, what can we measure differences on two control groups, where one, say, having the Yun kombucha with the CT and the infrared and the breathing technique, the hyperbaric chamber versus a control group that's different, even with the lighting. So that's something I'm trying, but again, it's involving application on physics and biochemistry and biomarkers and health. And domestically, I contacted Paul Haru after your talk with him, and he said, even my original dissertation says, it's great, come on over, I'd love for you to do your research. But the problem is funding. Canada's not the best in offering scholarships.
That's at McGill University, right?
Yeah. His program is amazing. I'm auditing his course at the moment with his online textbooks and courses, and it's phenomenal. It's very complex stuff, and it's the math and that you have to get into it. But it's really powerful stuff on helping out on it. Even with Jack Cruiser's stuff, Dr. McCullough, I kind of I don't always get there, but I enjoy Jack's stuff. But I find it's a thing of, he does the clever thing of not dumbing it down. He uses the correct words, and it's this game of always listening and looking material and having to memorize a definition of word and what what long explanation is. And then you start implementing the matter and the other aspects of it, and it makes a lot more sense. But I'm just gunning on the physics and biology now, because I'm able to derive a lot more solutions. And when I do get called in to be an expert in court, it's a lot easier to explain that whole explanation to a judge on it, and how to question the other party. Because when I get called to residential estates and they want to put up cell phone towers, I tell them, okay, these are the questions you need to ask, and the data need to assess things. And what's happened is either the permit's rejected or the installers go to a different area because they don't want to, present the data.
Yeah, like your ideas for the health side of it and the measuring the EMF side of it as a synergy, that's what I want to see researchers do to actually measure biological effects, pull in all of the breadth of everything, and control for all of these variables. But at the end of the day, it's funding, right? Where do you set this thing up? And now in the environments we have around us, everything's saturated with power grid, everything's saturated now going to be with wireless in a few years in most environments. It's hard. It's going to be harder and harder for researchers to really see really tight, statistical correlations.
Well, it's also a time delay issue. I mean, when you are doing a study, you have to spend a year doing literature review and ethics and all these things. And then you have to try to get the guys together. You have to do measurements. Then you have to do peer paper review. So by the time you publish, 7 years have passed and the data is so outdated. I mean, that's why I employ something called a practitioner research methodology, where, you look at doctors' medical case files and you look at what actually is happening in training right there and then. And what's the actual, that real live data and what their practical experience is. And that actually becomes a lot more valuable than just this, rigid echo chambering effect.
Yeah, the whole system right now is set up, you're right, for all these time delays. And then even the national toxicology papers that just came out, it was a really long study, but they're measuring just I'm going to measure one frequency in some of these studies and see if there's effects from one frequency, even though we're being hit with all this whole entire environmental soup of everything.
But remember, again, that's just part of the whole echo chambering thing, because when you look at, Lyle's work back in the day, and even now Hero's work in 2013, where they, actually showed conclusively, with the fields, that there is this direct effect. You don't need to get caught up in the NTP and the Ramazzini study anymore, because it's just creating a more echo chambering thing, because industry's going, let them talk, we'll fund the marketing because it works to their benefit. But when you go, I found when I look at international case law, whenever you have someone going up doing the public interest override argument, and there was a case in Germany where the state witness, the judge threw out his testimony and evidence because he was presenting weighted studies funded by industry. And because that was raised, the judge said, all your evidence that you presented is thrown out.
Sure.
What do you have? And because of that, the case was afforded to the applicant because they projected objective studies and projected the evidence. So again, like I said, my biggest take, even I was on a recent news expose, was don't use the word EHS. I mean, avoid it at all costs you can. You can just work on the echo chambering, and then because any PubMed search or doctor's going to look up EHS, he's already going to have a negative bias on you.
Yeah. But it's the expectations already built into the entire thing, and that is really at the meat of it. But what I don't think a lot of people know is that this is a giant movement that's happening now across the world, and the echo chamber, they think it's going to be just a small echo chamber. I think I have news for them. There's going to be a time when people are going to be exposed to this. They're going to feel it, feel it or sense it like we do. And there's going to be just, when there's some part of the population that is going to be ramping up and feeling this stuff, it's going to go public. The whole world's going to be aware of it. And then that small echo chamber, like the NTP study, yes, in small circles that's happening, but I don't think they're aware of how much the public's already learning about this.
Well, the recent High Court judge I saw, he was telling me, these kind of circumstances, that these companies, they don't care about the community. They only care about money. And that's why he told us to come back with other stuff, because when you want to take guys to court, he says you have to claim damages, because by that effect of the money thing, that's going to force a cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the community is upset or whatnot, I mean, going to court's horrible. It takes years and it's administrative head up. But, if you have more members working together, you are going to have a better success.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely. Like, I want to see EMF warriors just completely skyrocket in numbers. And then I think it's going to, without even outside of what we do, because of what's coming with all the wireless coming in. It's like in channels, just I'm noticing all over social media, all over the place. The awareness is really starting to build and grow a little more exponentially this year compared to even last. So
yeah, you have an amazing channel. I highly respect it. I mean, I love it. It's not doing the crazy activist thing. It's practical. It's functional. It's there. It's intelligent, and you guys are doing an amazing job. It definitely it helped do a big turnaround for me.
Yeah, we just try to focus directly on reality and logic. I mean, that's why I pulled the name in Myster Spock, because it's just, to me, you just look at the science and it speaks for itself. So anyway, I think, are you good? Did you get all the stuff out, or should I have you back on in the future?
If you want to have me back on, I'll be happy for that. I have no issue.
Your story is just like actually you're kind of famous, right? And I'm thinking down the road here, like maybe 15, 20 years, when our entire community it gets vindicated over this issue. Like, you're going to be one of those people that stand out, like, look at what you did in your country, pushing through on this. And because all the people out there, everybody that's suffering with sickness over or just all the electromagnetism that we're exposed to, and they feel like they're not making any headway, all these people someday will be vindicated. The whole public will know what happened to them and what they had to suffer. And that's another side of this whole thing, why we're EMF warriors, why we're doing this, because we're just trying to tell people that we're canaries that will someday, we're trying to warn the rest of the public that what's on the horizon for them.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of persistence. I mean, my family and I have been through this for years and years and years. And through that experience, you learn stuff. And, my unique approach on things has gotten results compared to other people just trying different, the same old scenario. So, I mean, that's why I created a site recently called jameslech.co.za, where I offer consultancy and help in that.
Excellent.
But yeah, it would be nice if I can become helpful, like the other big name guys in the future, and through that, that would be great. It's always a pleasure, but it requires more learning and efforts from me, and focusing on my family, because they're the ones that create that drive and that understanding. Otherwise, you get lost in it, and it's a very dangerous thing to get easily caught up in the paranoia and the concern thing, and missing out on nature. And you brought it up so many times, and gratefully, is that you have to reconnect and understand it, what's needed for you.
That's right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, James. And yeah, for sure, if things change for you, like you do get funding, you get this PhD really rolling down the road, I'll have you back on. I want to hear about what's really happening in the inside.
With pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.